20th, 2024. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor. Please, you might want to start by just reading the motion into the record.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have an opportunity to speak a bit to this last meeting, so I won't prolong and do a long discussion here. But for those who are watching, just as a reminder that the motion, again, with regard to SDTC, the Green Slush Fund, was as follows, that we all agreed to deal with today. Given the Auditor General's audit of Sustainable Development and Technology Canada, and given the government-appointed board members approved A, $59 million towards 10 ineligible projects, B, $76 million towards 90 projects in which board members had conflicts of interest and violated internal conflict of interest policies, and in violation of the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Technologies Act. C, $259 million towards 96 projects where board members held conflicts of interest, and D, $58 million towards projects without ensuring contribution agreement terms were met. The committee therefore expresses extreme concern with the blatant disregard of taxpayer funds, and therefore calls on the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry to recoup these funds for Canadian taxpayers within 100 days following the adoption of this motion, and that the committee report this matter to the House. We have had, and we will have more meetings on it, but we have had both the Ethics Committee report and the Auditor General's report. These numbers are straight from the Auditor General's report. They're not some sort of extensive research by my team and my office or myself. Those numbers are actually even worse. But we will suffice it for the purpose of this motion to leave it to the findings of the select 186 conflicts out of 226 sampled projects. I understand that in the Auditor General's audit period, there were over 400 projects approved totaling $832 million. The Auditor General only looked at 226 of more than 400 projects and found 82% were conflicted. By that matter, rough math would say that over $600 million probably went out conflicted, but the Auditor General didn't do the detailed audit of that, hence the motion last committee that met asking the Auditor General to do a deeper dive into all those transactions. But in this case, I think we know enough already to ask the committee to express our concern to the House. And the Deputy Minister of Finance, Simon Kennedy, actually said before committee that some of these funds should be returned. And in fact, the National Research Council, who were witnesses here this week, in their own scandal during the Chrétien government, actually did actively go out and recoup the money that was stolen during the process of awarding NRC contracts. The individuals were convicted, and the money was recouped by NRC. So there is a history of the government under the Liberals actually trying to recoup the money when it's absconded by people inappropriately. And that's what this motion instructs the minister to do. The minister needs to give direction. He has not actually found the time in all his extensive travels since his press release to actually meet with the NRC, as was admitted yesterday by the president of the NRC. He hasn't met with them to actually talk about how to improve the governance. He cares so much about improving the functioning of this thing that he has not held one meeting with the NRC, who's supposed to clean it up. So because of that, and because of the inaction of the minister, and because his own deputy minister said in committee the money should be recouped, we are asking it be done because we have no confidence that without the action of this committee and the demand and expression to the House to do that, that any attempt will be made by Minister Champagne or his officials to do the right thing and get this money back.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I really appreciate the care that Mr. Perkins has provided, and I think he's absolutely right in that this committee has a very significant role to play in how public funds are used where they're used and the level of accountability that should surround them as they're being used. And absolutely, the role of this committee is to ensure that we're holding that use of funds to account, whether it's through the reports of the Auditor General, which has raised significant concerns on this issue, whether it is a number of other avenues in which that have come to light, in which we realize that there are issues here. I do appreciate Mr. Perkins' motion, although I do have some concerns with it, because, and I'll raise them point by point. I think, given the number of meetings that we've had on this issue, and I think that given the scope and the broadness of what the questions from members has been, I think perhaps we need to expand this to not just SDTC and the Minister for ISAD, but to the entire government of Canada. And to say, you know what, let's see where else and how else. And the reason why I propose this is because it's not based on the testimony from the witnesses that we've heard thus far on this, based on becoming a little bit more familiar with the intricacies as to how money is provided. I think there are multiple ministries or departments, I should say, that would be implicated in terms of that return of money. Well, first off, you have to find out kind of the route. The matter is a little bit more complex than the black and white as is presented here and is presented by a lot of the questioning by my colleagues. And I think that it would be more worthwhile for us to say that it should be the Government of Canada that should be responsible rather than just the Minister for Innovation. I don't recall specific testimony, but I guess I have sat through these meetings. I do think that there were indications made by witnesses that this is beyond the scope of what the specific minister has in his purview. And given the contribution agreement between ISAD and SDTC, I'm sure that SDTC was also be implicated in recouping the funds, but we also know that it was an arm's length organization at the time. And while the minister is evidently accountable here, ultimately, even though he took significant steps to make sure that his responsibility as an overseer was maintained, and he took those necessary steps, and I think that he acted responsibly throughout this whole process. I do think that making this small tweak to broaden it to the Government of Canada, it would take into account the particularity of this situation and the nature of the complex process in what exactly it is that the minister, what this motion would ultimately be asking for. And then also, secondly, I do have some challenges with the 100 days timeline. I know that we pass a lot of motions through a lot of committees asking government officials, whether it's production of documents or coming to appear before committee, but I think that we do need to take into account the complexity of how this is going to happen. And that 100 days is not, in my opinion, a timeline that would help us figure out how to retrace, how to navigate and deal with the challenges of what this motion is asking. I know that members in this committee have reminded us repeatedly that parliamentary committees are supreme and that they have the ability to do what it is that they're asking. But we also want to make sure that our asks are reasonable. And so I'm not sure where the 100 days is coming from. I don't know if Mr. Perkins has perhaps done his own evaluation to see that this is how long it would take for them to go through this complex process, or is this just an arbitrary number? I'm not really sure where the 100 days is coming from. We're trying to ensure that there is a smooth transition that is occurring with what we've talked about to the NRC, et cetera, and to ensure that the least amount of disruption to businesses who've already known great disruption over the year. And it's been reported in the media just how much these small businesses have been disrupted by the freezing and et cetera. So 2/3 of the companies went through business interruptions, as is reported, and many more have said that they're unable to find any alternative funding, which goes against the entirety of the I guess the objective of what the program is.
Ms. Kling, can I just interrupt? And the floor will be yours again. I believe it is your intention. Have you proposed an amendment?
I'm just going through my reasoning, and then I'll propose the amendment.
Okay, thank you.
I
I didn't want the moment to slip and it not be heard. So okay,
absolutely
back
fine.
to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, as I was saying, so following the freezing of funds, 2/3 of companies went through business interruptions, and many more revealed that they're unable to find alternative funding. Now, this has resulted in layoffs and people having to sell off portions of their business. And these are not the people that are implicated here that we are talking about. These are respectable small businesses that have stake, that are trying to expand, that are trying to scale, that are trying to do the right thing within the industry here in Canada. So putting a time frame to recouping of the funds, it could place a significant stress on these businesses. And I don't think, and I don't see why we couldn't just limit the motion to calling for the recouping of funds without putting any additional pressure on these businesses with a set timeline, especially knowing that we don't know the complexities of how this process will work, and knowing that the pressure that businesses are under right now, SMEs that are really working hard in all of our ridings across the country to try to make things happen while also dealing with this challenge. And I'd also like to remind colleagues that these are small companies in Quebec, whether it's in Sherbrooke or in Salaberry de Valleyfield, in Thornhill, in Calgary, in Victoria. These are communities that are ours. And I think that we need to be more mindful here. Now, Parliament has taken issue with the way that things were done at SDTC, and we're not and should not be looking to punish or add additional stress on the businesses that are impacted here. And I also want to remind my colleagues that placing these businesses under any type of scrutiny, like we're technically calling for with this motion, it will make it difficult for them to get any type of additional financing, private or otherwise. And I'll pause here and I'll remind committee members that the majority of the businesses that have taken advantage of this program are in fact eligible, are doing the right thing, are trying to grow their business in an ethical and safe manner within our industry here in Canada. So in addition to recouping funds, they're also going to have difficulty in finding additional funding. And we're really putting them in a very difficult position. No third party will want to pour money into a business that is facing this type of scrutiny or is part of an investigation. And again, I want to be very clear that what we're doing here is not scrutinizing the legitimate businesses that take advantage of this program, that are able to hire more employees, that are able to scale up their businesses to get to where we need to go. So again, I advise our members on this committee to act with caution. This is a balance here that we need to make sure we maintain. 100% scrutiny is important. 100% wrongdoing should be punished. But collateral damage of small business in my country is not acceptable to me at all. And I think that we need to be a little bit more mindful in how we're conducting this. These businesses have already lived in a lot of difficulty following the freezing of funds, as I mentioned earlier. So let's please be mindful of what exactly we're doing here. So I would propose the amendment, Chair, as I've talked about, the two specific changes that I'd like to make to this motion. First of all is to strike the name of Minister of Innovation and to replace it with the Government of Canada. The Minister of Innovation is likely not the only participant, as I said, in the process, in this type of process. So broadening it to the Government of Canada ensures that we're including all players and can hold the broader government, including the minister, to account here. It's a small tweak, and it remains true to what Mr. Perkins is trying to attend with this motion. And then the second amendment, within the same second change that I would make to the motion, would be to remove the sentence within 100 days following the adoption of this motion. And I will park my comments there, Chair, with taking reservation to be at the bottom of the list should need be. Thank you.
All right. So we have a amendment to the motion to change Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry to Government of Canada, and then to strike within 100 days following the adoption of this motion. As is my custom, I'll turn to Mr. Perkins if he has any comments to make about the double amendment to his motion.
I guess I'd say I would be open to the Minister of Innovation Government if it was Minister of Innovation and Government of Canada more. And I really think the 100 days is important to get this process going. This fund has been frozen for a while. The Auditor General has produced a number and a list of companies where there's funds. The Auditor General has produced a list of how much money was given to them. So that process can begin. If there are more that come up through the continued examination of this or the additional, hopefully, review by the Auditor General, then those can be added to the list at the time. But there's no reason not to start. And I appreciate the comments of MP Khalid in terms of the impacts on the companies and working through that. But I think having it open-ended means that it'll probably never get done. And there needs to be a bit of an urgency to it in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to just put on the record, like what the actual impact is. So I do want to cite a company that we're dealing with here. So this was quoted in the news, and I will quote it here. QEA Tech was planning an ambitious international ramp-up of its energy efficiency technology last October when basically this whole controversy pulled its legs out from under it. To that point, the Markham, Ontario-based company, which uses drones to identify points of energy loss from high-rise buildings, had every reason to believe it was in line for $10 million from the federal agency, the Sustainable Development Technology Canada. That funding was key to a $25 million scale-up project involving 500 buildings in Canada and internationally, partly because it was validation for property companies with which QEA planned to partner, as well as for other investors. And then amid these allegations, primarily involving conflict of interest and human rights, human resources processes, as well as some funding decisions that exceeded its mandate that had nothing to do with QEA, SDTC abruptly had its funding powers suspended by the government. 7 months later, they still haven't been restored. And QEA has had to put its plans on hold. Rather than expanding, as was their original mandate and their plan, it's imposing a hiring freeze and let go of 3 of its 22 employees. And it's lost face among the project partners, from whom it worked hard to get letters of intent on which SDTC funding was conditional. And they're quoted as saying, "We got discredited among these companies." QEA's founder, Ms. Malati, and the CEO, they said in an interview that we had no answer to give to them. There are currently hundreds of similar stories across Canada's clean tech sector, many of them that are in worse positions than QEA, even if other entrepreneurs are more reluctant to go on record with them. SDTC, or was, the country's most important government entity for helping those types of companies avoid falling into the so-called valley of death, in which proponents of promising technologies prove unable to get first commercial projects off the ground. Its records show cumulatively spending $1.2 billion on grants since 2001. It has helped grow companies that have created over 24,500 jobs. And this is cited in the Globe and Mail. So the point that I'm trying to make here, Chair, is that yes, our work is very, very important, but at the same time, we have to make sure that our clean tech sector is able to thrive, is able to do the work that this whole sector is designed to do. And I think that the amendments that I propose really help us find that balance. It's not fair for us to punish collaterally the entirety of the clean tech sector for what has been the role of a few small bad apples and what has been a problem with the conduct of a few board members within the SDTC. I think we as a committee need to be more vigilant, more responsible, and more reasonable in how we are conducting ourselves. I've seen, Chair, through committees, not just this one, but across the board, where businesses get hauled in and they get defamed, they get questioned and interrogated and put on the quote-unquote stand or whatever. I'm sure Mr. Brock would know the terminology a little bit better than I would. But they get put through the ringer ultimately. And what that does is that it decreases trust within our industry, an industry that Canada is renowned for, which is that clean tech sector. And if we are not doing right by the industry, by innocent companies, innocent small businesses that come up with brilliant ideas to grow this sector, then what exactly are we doing here? Absolutely, we need to make sure that public accounts, taxpayer dollars, are dollar for dollar receiving the value that they have, which is the sweat and tears of Canadians. And that money is there for us to grow our industry. It is to grow the work that we do in our country, to grow our economy, and ultimately ensuring the well-being of all Canadians. And if we are now vilifying in many ways that clean tech sector, those small businesses, then I think that we have a problem here in how we're conducting ourselves. So I would again implore members on this committee, let us make these two amendments. I think it will not only help us in ensuring that we get to the objective of what Mr. Perkins is asking for, which is the recouping of funds, in a reasonable and practical way, by expanding the scope of rather than just to say, I said, but to say, let's look at everywhere else within the government departments where this may happen so that we can get to the conclusion that we're trying to get to. And then also making sure that we're striking a balance for that clean tech sector to ensure that they're able to conduct their business without being vilified through this whole process. So, Chair, what I'm asking for, I believe, is quite reasonable, and I'm really hoping that that colleagues all across the aisle will help support me on this. This is nothing to do with politics. This is nothing to do with clickbait. What I'm trying to do is to make sure that we are going forward, as is the purpose of what this committee is, reasonable accountability of public funds within all corners of this public sector within the government, as per the recommendations of the Auditor General. So I put it to committee members, let's put forward these two amendments, let's accept them, and let's move on with the day. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ms.